Hello, my name is Spencer Thompson, and this is my presentation over Loving 2016, which was directed by Jeff Nichols. So to begin, I'd like to give a short little plot synopsis so that those of us who have not seen Loving before can be able to keep up better. The film revolves around two primary characters, Richard and Mildred Loving. Richard Loving is a white construction worker in Caroline County, Virginia, and Mildred Loving is his soon-to-be and wife, who is a family friend, and she is actually a black woman. Whenever Mildred finds out that she is pregnant, they decide to get married, but Virginia had anti-miscegenation laws at the time, which meant that they were unable to get married because they were of two different races. So instead, they drive to Washington, D.C. to get married in 1958. Because of that, when they get back to Virginia, they get arrested, and their sentence is that they are no longer able to be in Virginia as a married couple. So they can't be in the state of Virginia at the same time, otherwise there would be consequences. The film revolves around it all leading to the Supreme Court case, in which an ACLU representative, that being Bernie Cohen, he basically takes them all the way to the Supreme Court and obviously wins the case, thus leading to the anti-miscegenation laws being illegal across all states in the nation. So, who was responsible for the film's shape, tone, and structure? The person responsible would be Nancy Bwirski. Nancy Bwirski originally made the film The Loving Story, which was released in 2012 at a small film festival, and it was funded entirely by a Kickstarter campaign. That film was a recounting of the true story, and as such, Loving is also a recounting of a true story. Nancy Bwirski is one of the producers of Loving, but she obviously wasn't the director being Jeff Nichols. She and a colleague approached Jeff Nichols about creating this film, and while she did have a producer role, she was not the director of it. And it was adapted entirely from the accounts of Mildred Loving. She was originally inspired to make the film because of the obituary of Mildred Loving that she read in the newspaper. And it's all about the Supreme Court case of Loving v. Virginia, which is one of the landmark civil rights cases. When was the film made and what time period does it depict? The film was released in 2016, however it depicts the civil rights movement of the 1960s. It takes place over the years of 1958 to 1967. It's really important that it came out in 2016 because, as we all know, the election of 2016 took place, in which the race was between Donald Trump, who is commonly known to be a racist person, versus Hillary Clinton. A lot of the buzz around this film was about the election at the time, specifically in reference to the fact that the racism that is so inherent to the plot was being seen in one of the presidential candidates. So, who funded the film? The Loving Story, which was what this film was based off of, was entirely funded by Kickstarter. However, Loving, the film itself, was funded by Turteltaub and Serap's Big Beach Films as the production companies. And I've included pictures of the representatives of those films that were on the producing team, Mark Turteltaub and Mike Seraph. And if you're noticing a little something about them in the context of this film, I certainly noticed it too. They are certainly two white men making a film about something that is inherently leaning more on the racial side. Speaking of the whiteness of those two producers, what is the relationship between film and filmmaker? All filmmakers involved in Loving were white people, and it shows. Out of all six of the filmmakers, that's including the director Jeff Nichols, not a single one is anything other than a white person, which is an odd choice for a film so specifically about race. And as such, it has this weird, as I like to call it, a Disney's Pocahontas both sides narrative. So to explain what I mean, in Disney's Pocahontas, both sides of the story, the Native Americans and the Englishmen, sing the song Savages about each other, and it's supposed to be one of those whoa, blow your mind moment that both these people think the same thing of these people. But this film tries to say that black people also see it as a bad thing that white people and black people are getting together, even though that's not part of the text itself. It's all subtext. Like there's a scene where they're in a grocery store and uh, Richard touches Mildred's pregnant stomach. And the grocery clerk, who is a black woman, gives them an awkward stare. There's also implications that one of the black members of Mildred's family are the ones that ratted them out to the cops on multiple occasions without that ever being resolved in any way. Because these were all white people, there's such a focus on this both sides narrative that seems to be some way of resolving guilt for white people that it seeps its way into the film itself. So now that that's out of the way, how does the film represent historic events, social movements, political figures, or communities? The film directly depicts the Lovings, which are Richard and Mildred, and all of their children, the three children, the ACLU, and specifically their lawyer Bernie Cohen, and various other real figures. Those figures include the sheriff at the time, who was Sheriff R. Garrett Brooks, as well as in a very small 6-minute portion of the film, Gray Vallette, who was a Life magazine photographer who took pictures of Richard and Mildred during this whole debacle. But it really only lasted for that long. The film also references Attorney General Robert Kennedy, but with no tangible interactions. Mildred just writes a letter at one point, and the ACLU calls her, saying they were referred to her by Attorney General Robert Kennedy. As for the narrative and technical techniques that are used by the film, whenever Richard and Mildred are shown in the same shot, it's always a very close-up shot, kind of like framing them as the center of this universe instead of something. I've included a picture of what happens after the Supreme Court whenever they are surrounded by all of these journalists and news people, and all they can do is just hug each other and not even answer a single question because they're just so overjoyed. And the film just encloses on this. That's seen in so many parts of the film. Also, in the legal system, anytime a judge is shown on screen, it's usually in a low-angle shot to give the judge some, like, depiction of higher power. So, how was the film distributed and exhibited? Loving originally premiered at the Cannes Film Festival on May 16th, 2016, where it was actually in the running for the Palme d'Or. From there, it started off with a limited release on November 4th of 2016, but after that it was widely released on November 11th of 2016. So that limited release was only places like New York and Los Angeles, like these very, very obvious places for it to go to start out with, and then once it was seen to be popular, it went over the entire United States. After that, it went across to Europe in January 17th of 2017, and then all over the world. So, how was the film received and how did it function culturally? Well, it made $12.9 million at the box office. That is in comparison to the $9 million that it took to make the movie. So, $3.9 million profit, making back about a third of what it took to make the film. That's nothing to scoff at. In its second weekend, its average beat films like Moonlight, Doctor Strange, and Arrival, which I have some strong feelings about, but I'm not going to talk about. Loving also has received a lot of praise for its accuracy, and it has an 89% positive on Rotten Tomatoes. Also, just a side note for its actual premiere, like was the film received? It received a 5-minute long standing ovation. That's kind of insane. And multiple articles at the time came out talking about how this was the film for this election cycle because of the previously mentioned general election of 2016 between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So what is the film's significance to American history? Well, unfortunately, the film has only been out for 4 years, so we can't really see what the impact of the film has been. However, we can take a look at how it's been reframing things in history. So, first of all, problems with prejudice around both race and interracial couples unfortunately still exist. An example of this would be whenever Old Navy put out an ad in May of 2016, which was whenever this film premiered, where the couple that was prominently featured within the ad was an interracial couple. People on Twitter called this quote unquote race mixing and threatened to boycott Old Navy because of it. The film also brings attention to how the Supreme Court is able to make change within the United States. The citizens of the United States, unfortunately, see a lot of smoke and mirrors around how the judiciary system works. Take, for instance, the case of Obergefell versus Hodges, in which gay marriage was ruled to be a constitutional right. Uh, in the case of Loving versus in the case of Loving versus Virginia, as well as Obergefell versus Hodges, the Supreme Court ruled that these states' laws were unconstitutional and thus caused an effect across all 50 states instead of specifically the one state. And this film really illuminates that for the audience. And with that, I hope you enjoyed my presentation over Loving 2016, directed by Jeff Nichols. This film is incredibly important, and if you have not seen it by this point, you really ought to, because it is not only an important film, but also generally a good film to watch.